let's move on to another term. Now we know lobbyist registrant PAC, or how a reporting committee would determine who those folks are. Now let's define bundled contribution. Now I know the term bundled contribution has been used for many years, whether with the press or in reference to campaign finance law, but now bundled contribution is a term of art. It used to be used interchangeably with what are called earmark contributions, but that can no longer be the case because bundled contributions are very specific, and so we're going to go over what the definition of a bundled contribution is. Now, bundled contributions, there are really two general types of bundled contributions. The first such is a contribution that is forwarded by a lobbyist registrant or lobbyist registrant PAC or someone acting on behalf of that lobbyist or registrant or lobbyist registrant PAC. Now, the forwarded contribution would refer to contributions either monetary or in kind. Okay, so I want to clarify that. It can be either a monetary or in-kind contribution to be bundled, and it would be forwarded by the lobbyist or lobbyist registrant PAC either by direct means or it can be forwarded electronically. Okay, so either way it could be considered a forwarded contribution. And so if a lobbyist registrant or lobbyist registrant PAC forwards a contribution, it's a bundled contribution. Now the second type of bundled contribution is a contribution where the contributor gives the contribution directly to the reporting committee. So I make a contribution directly to a campaign committee. However, the campaign gives credit to a lobbyist for having raised that money on their behalf. Okay, so that's a situation where the contribution is received by the campaign or any reporting committee, and then that committee gives credit to a lobbyist. So in that case, the lobbyist hasn't handled the check, but they haven't forwarded the check, but it would still be considered bundled if they receive some sort of credit for raising that contribution. And we'll talk more about what it means to credit or certain means of crediting contributions. But before we do, I just want to talk about one exception to the definition of bundled contributions, and that's for a lobbyist or registrant making a contribution from their own personal funds. Okay, so a lobbyist or registrant who's an individual makes an individual contribution from their personal funds to a campaign. That's not a bundled contribution. Okay, that's just a personal contribution from a lobbyist or registrant. And that exception would also apply to that person's spouse. Okay, so that would not go towards this lobbyist bundling disclosure that we're going to talk about in a minute. Okay, and that's the same would go with a lobbyist registrant PAC. So a lobbyist registrant PAC, it's registered with, say it's an SSF registered with the FEC, they're allowed to make contributions to campaigns and parties and leadership PACs. So if they're making contribution from their own personal funds, not forwarding somebody else's money or anything along those lines, that is not considered bundled. That's, again, is just a straightforward contribution. Okay? Okay, let's talk more about those credited contributions, that second type of bundled contribution. Because within the new rules, the Commission did help to define what it means to give credit, what it means to either track or credit contributions from lobbyists. Now, some of the examples would first include keeping records of contributions and keeping records of the crediting being done. Records, is just as it indicates, is a written documentation, either a chart or a spreadsheet or anything where data is kept where the reporting committee keeps track of contributions that were raised and who was responsible for raising them. So let's say I'm a lobbyist and I solicit money from a friend and forward it and say then my friend gave the contribution directly to the campaign. But the campaign kept record of the contribution from my friend, but that I was the one who raised it for them. So just keeping a simple record of that is going to be considered bundled because I'm receiving credit for having raised that money. Okay. Now similarly, oftentimes committees want to give some sort of designation or other recognition for individuals or PACs who raise money on their behalf. And if they do so, that could also be considered a bundled contribution. The first type designation could be, and let me just say, it's any sort of benefit that a lobbyist or lobbyist registrant PAC would receive for having raised money. A first such designation could be like, say, a title. Oftentimes campaigns or committees will say anyone who helps raise over $50,000 for our campaign is part of the Gold Star Club. Okay, that's a title someone receives in recognition for raising a certain amount of money. That would be a title and it's considered a part of crediting, and that would make it a bundled contribution, anything that they raise. Tracking identifiers. This is more in the solicitation materials or anything along those lines, where when contributors make their contributions, perhaps they write a certain number on the check when they submit the checks, or something along those lines, which will show a direct link between someone, a lobbyist who has raised money, and the money coming in that that person's responsible for. Okay, that's another way. Also, access. What that means is access to events that the reporting committee may put on. So let's say you have a party committee and they have a recognition dinner for anybody who's raised more than $100,000 for them that year. Okay, so access to that kind of event, an invitation to that event in recognition for the amount of money the lobbyist or registrant raised, that's going to be considered crediting. And the last such type example of crediting is providing some sort of memento, autographed copy of the candidate's book, or a photo with the executive chairman of the party committee. Something like that that is given, again, in recognition for raising money for that committee. Okay, so those are the kinds of things we're talking about that would make a contribution bundled. And I just want to clarify that that crediting is done by the recipient committee. Okay? So the lobbyist raises money on behalf of the committee. Individuals may give the money directly to the campaign or reporting committee, but then the lobbyist is credited by the reporting committee for the money they've raised. Okay, does that make sense? So again, we've talked about what does it mean to be a bundled contribution. There's two kinds, either forwarded by a lobbyist or registrant, lobbyist registrant PAC, or where the contribution comes from the contributor but is then credited to a lobbyist or lobbyist registrant PAC. Now, we've already had some questions about the $16,000, so let's go over what that means. Just because a contribution is bundled, let's say you determine the contribution your recipient committee received is bundled, doesn't mean it's automatically disclosed on the lobbyist bundling report. There's a disclosure threshold, and that threshold for 2009 is $16,000. And this figure is indexed for inflation, so this is a number just for 2009, and it's going to be indexed annually. And as with some of our other limits and expenditure, contribution and expenditure limits are also indexed, it will be published in the Federal Register. Usually in February is about the time that we receive the numbers from Department of Labor and can do our calculations. Okay, but for this calendar year, the lobbyist bundling disclosure threshold is going to be $16,000. As I mentioned, it's not just a straight $16,000 for the year or for the month, it's during a covered period. And that's another new term. And let me just caution that for those of you who are used to filing campaign finance reports and are used to the term reporting period, covered period is just a little bit different. Okay, so if you bear with me, we'll show you kind of how they work together, but it is a slightly different definition. And covered period is determined by type of committee as well. But generally, what a covered period is going to include is the regular reporting period for the reporting committee. So, for example, for a campaign committee that files quarterly, the covered period is going to also include the quarterly filing periods. And for a PAC that files monthly, it would be monthly. But the thing with covered period, in the statute, it's covered periods. So there are situations where the lobbyist bundling disclosure is covering two different periods, not only the quarterly or monthly period, but in addition to a semi-annual period. Okay? So just to make that a little bit clearer, let's look at the schedule by type of committee, and hopefully that will make a little bit more sense of how they work together.